welcome to MSD at Home series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Djordje STOJANOVIC, and I am a senior lecturer in architectural design here at the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. My pleasure is to introduce Verena von Beckerath, who together with Team Heide is co-founder of Heide von Beckerath architecture studio based in Berlin, responsible for a string of built collective housing projects, widely and internationally published and awarded. Verena is also a professor of architecture and the chair of design and housing at Bauhaus Universität in Weimar. And for today's talk, I'd like to set the context by saying that in Berlin, a large portion of new homes is produced independently from volume-built developers, and that self-organizing housing groups have a prominent role in Germany. Working with co-housing communities and cooperatives enables Heide von Beckerath to engage with future residents and informs their practice. Their work is about housing affordability and community building, and their projects are delivered with both conceptual and practical qualities. In particular, I hope you're going to hear about three of their build projects in Berlin: R50, AIBEB, or co-housing development at former Berlin Flower Market, and the Paul Zobel Street. In Studio Epsilon, a capstone subject of architecture major in Bachelor of Design, which I'm coordinating, the work of Heide von Beckerath is amongst the precedents we study. It is helping us explore a number of new angles and perspectives on collective housing. We therefore treasure the opportunity to hear from Verena in first person, but also hope that the talk will be interesting to students from Studio B and other graduate school studios, and we hope to hear from them at the end. Without further ado, I'll let our guest talk. Verena, thank you.
So thank you very much, Djordje. I'm very happy to talk to you today. Of course, it would be much more convenient to interact with you in person, but I think we have got used to it in some way, and I have a semester of digital teaching behind me, and so we will manage today. I will present 5 projects from my office to you. 3 of them Djordje already mentioned. They are recent projects from the last, I would say, 8 years. And I will start with a very small project back from the years 1966 to 1969, 1996 to 99. And it's a very personal project, but also a project that has a lot of influence on our work on collective housing. And in the end, I will give you a kind of perspective to a project under construction. So the first image is a corner on the first floor of a single family house that we designed in 1996, as I said, and it was realized in 1999. And it came out of a competition where a construction firm was asking for single family houses designed by architects. We didn't really like the task because we were much more interested in collective housing and how people would live together. But then in the end, we decided that if we could challenge the house with a roof and a garden, and change the program into a more liberal floor plan and a different way of using space, it could be really interesting. So this is a photograph from the realized house, and what you can see is the workshop of the housewife in this case. She used this glass corner for some work she does at home. This drawing is quite important to understand the house, but you can see that there are no ordinary rooms, but the idea was to have a kind of apartment that would allow for closed rooms that can be open to a all-around corridor space with a width of 1.85 meters, so that both categories of space would interact with each other. And in a way, the corridor space was the real invention, because we wanted it to be a kind of open plan for play and leisure and work and so on. This is a photograph from the exhibition, because when the house was realized, it was exhibited, it was furnished, and then it was a kind of open house for 3 months, because this construction company wanted to invite people to be interested in the house and to buy it. And you can see the corridor with some people, so you can see how it can be used as a space for social interaction. These images come from a catalog. We had an exhibition in Hamburg and another one in Paris, and we printed a catalog. And what you can see here is that when we were thinking about this house, which didn't really have a plot in the competition brief, it was not only the construction firm, but also a very popular magazine, and it was a kind of media project in a way. And these two launched the competition. So when we were looking for an appropriate approach to this task, we were also thinking about having this house in different environments. These are very early Photoshop collages. You can see it here. And this is a reference project we were extremely interested in, because it served for us as a kind of prototype. It's the house Falkenberg by Heinrich Tessenow. And many years later, we visited the area. It's an urban development and houses by Bruno Taut, but in the middle of this modernist, beautiful modernist Siedlung from the 1920s, you will find the house by Heinrich Tessenow. And I will share some beautiful drawings with you, because I think they really talk to us about the idea of home. They are by Tessenow. I will not comment them, but this one is interesting. I will comment it because he was very much interested in the relationship between the interior and the exterior, and I find this drawing especially beautiful. And this one also. And this interior room. And he also included in this series of drawings the idea of work. And as we are all working at home at the moment, I find this an interesting image for us to think about. Another reference for this house was Mon Oncle by Jacques Tati. I don't know if you know this film. I would recommend that you watch it. It's about how a family struggles with their new built modernist house. It's also from the film. And we found this image from the Farnsworth house by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe extremely interesting, because the relationship between the kitchen and the large windows inspired us to think about the qualities of the corridor. And another reference was the Haus am Horn in Weimar. It was built by students under Georg Muche from the Bauhaus in Weimar. That's where I teach. And this is the floor plan, and you can see that there's a kind of large living room in the center, and all the functional rooms, I would say, are positioned around this central living room. And I think it's a really interesting floor plan. And what we did with our house was the opposite way. The corridor wraps around the rooms. So it's maybe a complementary approach. This is a photograph by Andrew Alberts from 2018, winter. The house was under reconstruction, as you can see. Now we are coming back to the house that I'm presenting. We called it Wunschhaus because we analyzed that so many people want to live or have the idea that they would like to live in a single family house. And here you can see the room where the only child of the family who finally moved in sleeps. And the rooms are quite small. And here you can see how the room is enlarged into the corridor for a desk and studio to do homework and so on. And this is the house that was finished in 1999. And you can also see how the surrounding looks. And I think we all know this kind of suburban environment. Next project is R50. The name comes from Ritterstraße 50. This is a street in Berlin-Kreuzberg, but it's not the Kreuzberg you might expect. It's a very green and not very dense area. I like this image very much because you can see almost all the architectural elements that we implemented into this project. You can see a lawn. You can see that this garden has no fences to the street, which is in the back. So it's a public kind of garden. You can see a ramp that leads to a souterrain entrance, and you can see bicycles, and behind the railing of the ramp you cannot see, but there is a community space. And then you can see that the building has a diverse facade made from wood with different openings and closed elements. And you can see the all-around balconies with no divisions between the apartments. I would like to introduce to you the idea of the Baugruppe. This is a concept where people who are planning to live together and to build a collective house together would form a group and commission an architect, or often it's the other way around. The architects find a plot and they try to form a group with friends and family or others who might be interested. And this was the group during the planning process of R50. And this was, I think, one of the excursions we did together with the future residents, owners, and our group of architects to visit other projects we are interested in to discuss their features. And here you can see the floor plans. I would like to say that we have developed and designed this project together with another office, Ivo and Jesko Fezer, who themselves form a kind of collaboration. And as they moved in, the project was partly self-commissioned, and so it was a very interesting structure between architects, residents, and the way it was commissioned. Here's an overview over the different floor plans. I don't want to go into detail with every single floor plan, but you can see that the basement is a little bit different than the regular floor plans, and that the regular floor plans are varying a bit. And if you look closely, you will see that there is a kind of core with a staircase and an elevator. And you might also see that the bathrooms are more or less at the same position in the north. They form a kind of core. And in the south of the building, they form a kind of line. And so you can see how the floor plans of the different apartments are arranged with some similar elements of organization, but also they differ a lot regarding the amount of rooms and the way the rooms are how the rooms are connected. There's one thing which can be seen here is that the all-around balcony, which is a very important feature for this project because it is one of the shared spaces, sometimes leads to another rotation inside the buildings. So you can see that there are connections between the rooms on the inner side of the facade. We will see it later. This is how the building is embedded within an, I would say, an open plan development from the late 1950s, so post-war housing development, when the density was lowered to 50% in West Berlin. And this is also why the Senate of Berlin thought that it could be re-densified. But as you can see here, the building site is quite complex. There's a block building to the right, to the east, from the 1990s, when we were trying to reconstruct the historical city. And then to the left, you can see one of the buildings that don't follow the street, but they follow the open plan approach. And our building is somehow in between those two structures. And it used to be a circulation. So in the zoning plan, it was not meant to be a plot for building a new house. And that's why the Senate of Berlin decided to have a concept-based bidding for Baugruppen, and that's how we won this competition, and the group was able to purchase the plot. Concept-based bidding means that a plot that is not privately owned but owned by the community is not sold for the highest price, and it doesn't go for the highest bidding, but the community, in this case the Senate and the Bezirk, the district of Kreuzberg, they decided the cost for the plot was fixed, and they decided for the best approach, the best concept. And the group was already formed. We had something like 5 months to work on this project, and then in the end, we won this kind of bidding. I will show you some images by Andrew Alberts. Andrew Alberts is a photographer who was our partner. So I'm working with Tim Heide, and we founded our office together with Andrew Alberts in 1996, but he left in 2008 to become a photographer, and we are working very closely together, and most of the images you will see are taken by Andrew, and I will let you know when the images are taken by another photographer. So there's the staircase. You can see that the material is quite raw, so this is a low-cost building, and together with the residents, the future owners, we decided to have a very raw approach to surfaces and material. And I would say that the concept worked with a kind of shift from nice surfaces to a certain flexibility in the floor plans, and we'll see it later. So this is how the apartments look like. They have a concrete flooring, a concrete ceiling. You can see the wooden elements that you have seen from the outside. You will also be able to see them from the inside. We developed a series of elements based on 60 centimeters. So closed, open, larger windows, smaller windows. Every window is a door that opens to the balcony. And here is a corner situation. This is an individual floor plan with a triangle room. And this is very interesting because here you can see what I explained to you before, the kind of rotation that is offered to the, offered to the floor plans in parallel to the rotation that the balcony does for the whole building. And this is the balcony. So in the end, it is like neighbors can visit each other via the balcony. There are no divisions. We have been asked many times if this would be possible for a building where the neighbors didn't decide to be neighbors. So they didn't decide to live together. This, I think, a very interesting question. Here it works very well. The owners decided to live in this way, and also the layouts for the apartments are made in a way that it is up to 20 meters. You have up to 20 meters length of balcony, so you're not like your neighbor is just next to you. And yeah, I think the residents decided for it, and also they learned how to deal with it. Children visit each other, and yeah, it's a very nice shared space on each level. Here's I will briefly explain to you the approach to construction for the building. So it's a concrete skeleton, like the domino house. And the facade is made of different, I would say, yeah, different elements maybe. There is the open elements, the closed elements, and then you have a metal, the metal construction of the balconies. And this is the building when it was finished, seen from the street. And the day of the opening, which was a very nice day because the people who moved in decided to have a kind of open house. So every apartment was open, and that's why you can see so many people on the balconies. And the community space it's a double height community space on the basement and ground floor. And after a while, a kitchen moved in. And that's how the community space looks now. There is a kitchen, there's also stairs to a gallery. It can be divided into two. It's a double height room, and you see a yellow curtain on the gallery, and behind the yellow curtain is another small room with a bed where a guest can stay overnight. And then you have many doors to this room. There's one door on the ground floor of the room next to the main entrance. There's another door you can see at the end of the gallery. It leads to the staircase. And then there are, I think, 4 more openings to the garden, to the street, and so on. So this community space can be used not only for shared meetings, meals, parties, discussions, but it is also meant to be open to the public and to the neighborhood. And then the house started to develop its own life. I will show you some glimpses of life here. And there's another topic. The project was published many times, and this publication is from 2011. So it was made during the planning process. And it's interesting because there are some diagrams that I would like to share with you. For example, they were done in the beginning of the planning process, and they are based on interviews with the future residents about their needs and wishes and the relationships between rooms they have and they would wish to use. And an overview over the different architectural parts of the building. And here's another series of diagrams where the idea and the location and the uses for shared spaces were discussed. And they are represented here. So in the beginning, we as the architect provided the floor plans with shared spaces on each level. So the idea was that, for example, 3 apartments would have a shared library or a shared room for their children, and so on. And during the discussion with the group, it came out that the best solution would be to have one larger community space, the one that you saw already, and that all the different functions they would wish to have would somehow be embedded into the program of this community space. It's another publication project. The project was also interestingly published in the art context. The reason is that many of the residents are artists or work in the creative context. This is, for example, a talk when Hila Pelek, who's a curator, talked to some of the residents about to need and to have. And another article which was published at Metropolis magazine. And I like the title very much, Don't Call It a Commune. And the whole article discusses the idea of co-housing and also the similarities, but also differences to a commune. And then another exhibition project in Prague. We were approached in 2015 by 2 young curators, and they had the idea to introduce co-housing to their city. So they invited 6 projects from Berlin, and they presented them in a very nice way. The huge models were built by students from the Technical University in Prague. And there was a second room where they had a kind of archive about co-housing, and they invited people from Prague, especially from their generation and community, to discuss the possibilities of co-housing and kind of live workshops. And we were invited from time to time to present and to discuss with them and so on. And this was the very beautiful catalog they did. And another kind of media project, the house became the location for Homeland. It's a series which you might know. And in this case, it's about a terrorist who is visiting his professor, and we will follow him. So the ramp, and he enters the building, and he leaves the apartment via the balcony. Police is entering, and this is Nina Hoss, a very prominent and wonderful German actor against the concrete ceiling of one of the apartments. And now I'm presenting another series of photographs by Jonas Holthaus, just to give you a different approach to the visual representation of the building. And now it is already used. So this is from, maybe 2015, I would say, the community space, the staircase, one apartment. I especially love this image, the roof garden, and another series by Steffen Jagenburg. Here you can see one of the residents working in the community space and in his apartment. This is how they live. They are artists. She's an artist. He is an architect. They use the balcony together with their little daughter. And this is a family dinner on the roof terrace. And as some of you might know, the article which has been published last week at Assemble Papers, it's an article by Sophie Rezipetsky. I hope she's listening. Maybe she does. I'm reading from her article. I'm quoting Ruth Buchanan. You can see her with her family. And she says, "I'm not in my neighbor's face all the time." She's talking about the COVID-19 situation during the last months. "I'm not in my neighbor's face all the time, but I have never felt totally alone or isolated. The building has become a space of empathy. Everyone is keeping safe, but also connecting." And another quote, "In a slow burn kind of way, living in R50 has impacted on my self-understanding and worldview. Having the capacity to engage with a space over a long period of time and transform it, alongside my relationships within the building, have been immeasurably valuable. I hope people can become open to this kind of porous community. Yes, an anonymous apartment block is challenging, but if it has shared zones and there's the capacity for it to be intergenerational, it could be so positive. Perhaps the pandemic can also be a moment of reflection for some. I hope that this is going to be an opportunity for people to really look at how they want to lead their lives." Yeah. Okay, next project. This is a much larger project, also in Berlin-Kreuzberg. It's maybe 500 meters from R50, and it also is connected to the first one, but it's also a little bit different. It's much larger, as you can see. What is interesting about this project is that it combines ownership and rent, which is not so easy to combine because usually you have a housing association or developer who are interested to build housing projects that they keep and rent to residents, or you have developers that develop a building and sell the apartments, or you have a so-called Baugruppe. They are commissioning an architect and they want to live there themselves. But in this case, we also developed the building from the beginning together with IV again, and we collaborated with a cooperative, and this cooperative holds 25% of the building. So as they are having apartments for rent, and the other apartments and studios are owned, there's a very interesting mix of a social mix and a mix of interests and so on. The other interesting thing is that there's also studio space. So our experience with R50 was that many of the artists who live at R50 said, it would have been so interesting to include studio space, and this is something we could realize here. So there's a mix of work and live, and I will briefly introduce you to the urban context. In the middle of this photograph, you can see the former Berlin Flower Market Hall from the 1960s. It tells the story of the divided city because this part of the city was somehow the periphery of West Berlin. There was a lot of destruction during and after the war, and this is also why the Internationale Bauausstellung, the International Building Exhibition, took place in this environment. For example, to the right, you can see some examples of the IBA in the 1980s. And then you can also see the Jewish Museum by Daniel Libeskind, which is an extension to a Baroque palais which was left over. And this flower market hall is from the 1960s, and it was transformed into another extension of the Jewish Museum. And the circulation space around the flower market hall became open for development. And then in a much larger scale, the Senate of Berlin decided to have a concept-based bidding, not to sell the plots because they are, of course, it's a very good location, and not to sell them for the highest possible price, but to have an open bidding, and together with IV and the cooperative Selbstbaugenossenschaft Berlin EG, we took part in the bidding, and in the end, they voted for our concept out of 3 because there were 3 plots included into the bidding. Here's the zoning plan, and our plot is in the south, and you can see that it is quite deep. It's the building that we have designed and realized has a depth of 23 meters, which is quite unusual for housing. And the reason is that the zoning plan was not focused on housing, but rather on office space and commercial space. Our approach was to have a kind of mix of different users, of owners, people who rent, but also a little bit of commercial space, a social association, local initiatives and services, and creative enterprises. And we developed this volume for the plot, which is somehow the maximum volume. And we knew that the whole process, the whole design process, and all the discussions we would have would be related to density, because if you develop a building like this with a width of 23 meters, you have to think about how people live together in such a dense environment. And what we then did is we somehow tried to have a very economic circulation system. This is based on 2 vertical cores and several streets outside of the building, but also inside of the building. You will find 2 linear circulation streets on the ground floor outside of the building, then one in the middle of the building in the interior, and another one on the roof. And to understand this approach, it's a little bit complicated to understand, but this is one of the sections, and this is another one. And I go back to the first one, you can see, you can maybe identify the rue intérieure in the middle of the building, and you can see how this rue intérieure allows for the accessibility of apartments to the left and to the right, but also to the upper floor. You see the staircase. And then there's studio space on the ground floor and in the souterrain, and there's also more studio space on the roof. And here you can see that the so-called rue intérieure has little courtyards where daylight comes down. This is cut through one of the courtyards. And here's an image of the rue intérieure during construction, and another one in one of these courtyards. This approach to circulation allowed for many different kinds of apartments and studio space, and I will click here through this series quickly. It's only to give you an idea of smaller, larger, duplex, and so on, kinds of units. So one of the problems with a large group, there are almost 90 units in this building, was how to communicate the architectural agenda to such a large group. And at one point we realized that visualizations, classical visualizations of the whole building would not serve us to understand what this huge building would look like, because we were much more interested in the details of openings and galleries and railings. And I will guide you through this series of sketch-like images that are focused on certain spatial details. This is the entrance hall. This is the access road to the south, where you have little bridges to the double height studio spaces in the souterrain, and the gallery above with glass bricks, and the rue intérieure with the green courtyards. This is how we imagine the courtyards to be. The street on the roof, a roof garden. And I will now, as Djordje asked me to show you some floor plans, I will guide you through the building via the floor plans. I will start with the roof plan. So this is the roof, the upper roof. And here you can see how a group of Japanese students climbs from the rue extérieure on the roof to the upper roof, because there are two levels of roofs. And this is the floor plan of the other roof, where there is a community space that opens to the garden. And then you have a very nice view towards social housing from the 1970s in Berlin-Kreuzberg. This is the garden last, I would say, September 2019, when the first plants were visible. Again, the group from YGSA in Yokohama. And this is an image I like a lot, because you can see here a special situation on the roof, where to the right is a bungalow-like studio, and to the left is something like a bench made from concrete that also allows for plants. And it somehow tells the story of the doubled quality of circulation space that we try to embed into this large building. This is the little studio on the rooftop, one of them one out of 4. And this is the level under the roof. And here you can see how the larger apartments are, how can I say, they go through the building from the north to the south, and they are accessed from the roof. And again, another level where you have apartments that go through, they are accessed from the rue intérieure. This is an image where you might understand the depths of these apartments. They get light from the courtyard in the middle, and in most cases there's the kitchen. So it's quite interesting that people who are in the kitchen and are cooking might have a kind of chat, visual chat with another party on the other side of the courtyard, where there's also a kitchen. So there are small neighborhoods that are arranged around the courtyards. Another image that shows the relationship between the courtyard and the apartment. And this is the level with the rue intérieure, which looks like this at the moment. And this is an apartment to the north, where there's a smaller studio apartment that is connected to the long apartment on the next level. And the window to the north, to the flower market hall. And this is a smaller studio apartment to the south with a large balcony, and it has a small bedroom downstairs. And this is the so-called split level. Here's a couple that uses 2 studio spaces and lives in the middle of the deep building. And here's the desk that opens to the gallery. And another studio on the ground floor. The studios are double height, like 5 meters high. And we developed a kind of kit how to build the studio in the interior. So there's always a gallery and stairs, but it was designed together with the users of the studios. So not designed, but organized together with them. The design is done by the architects, but it's organized together with them. The same studio on the gallery. And this is another studio to the flower market hall. Also a double height studio that opens to the public space of the square. And one of the studios is run by a woman who has a restaurant, but she's also working with ceramics, as you can see. She's from Korea. It's a very nice restaurant. And the basement. And as you know already, we are interested in lowering the ground floor into the basement, or trying to use space that is lowered, like the souterrain entrance at R50. And here we tried to have studio space in the basement on the southern side. Sorry. And this is an image I really like, because you can see how the public space, the street to the south, is seen to the right, and then there's this lowered space between the studios and this wall. I will also guide you around the building. This is how it looks like from the Lindenstraße. And there's also a school next to it. This is seen from the south. And if you move a little bit closer, you can see that what I find very interesting, that the balconies are somehow furnished in a very similar way. So somehow it's less about individual representation of individual lifestyles, but I think this image tells something about how the community is growing, and there are also little openings between the individual balconies so that people can help each other with watering the flowers. And the building has a facade made from ceramic tiles. They are three-dimensional, so they reflect light in a different way at different times of the day. And this is the facade of the 5-meter high studio level on the ground floor. And we were very much interested in working on the ground floor, because usually you would say in the city center there can be shops or commercial uses, but we don't think that this is always a good idea. So in this case, we were thinking about the productive city. So how can living and working come down to the ground floor and somehow contribute to the public space. So these doors can stay open, and the activities are visible from the outside, and you can walk all around the building. This was an event organized by the magazine Arch Plus when the building was finished, and this was a talk in one of the studios. And another part of the event was a panel held in the rue interieur of the building. Yeah. So this was the so-called EBEP. The full English title is Residential and Studio Building at the former Berlin Flower Market. I will now present to you the project Paul-Zobel-Straße. This project has been designed for a public housing association owned by the city of Berlin, and the challenge was quite different. This is a large housing block from the 1970s, I think. So they have 10 stories, these blocks, and small apartments, and there's a huge courtyard. And this occurs quite often in Berlin, especially in the eastern part of the city. And as there's a lack of housing, these spaces are discussed to be used for redensification. But of course, the residents of the blocks are not so happy about it. They think that the luxurious part of their housing estate is this large courtyard. So it's a very sensible matter. And the question is, can the densification of these large housing blocks contribute to the quality of the lives of the people who live there? We think yes, but we also had to develop a strategy for ourselves. These are some details of the ground floors of the existing housing blocks. You can see that there's no relationship between ground floor users and public space. And this is why one of our approaches to this task, this was a competition we had won in 2015. That's Heide von Beckerath, it's our office, was how to contribute to the public space in the inner courtyard of this block. And we built models and we tested them during the day and at night. And another approach was to the floor plans. We thought that if we don't know the residents, because this is rented, housing for rent, and part of it is subsidized, so people might get an apartment without having chosen the area of the city, the architecture of the building, and so on and so on. So we have been working on floor plans that are open enough to, on one hand, to allow for like bedroom, living room, and so on, but on the other hand, also encourage people to use their space in a different way, to work at home or to live in a kind of community instead of a core family. That's a topic we are extremely interested in. And now I'm showing you a series of typical floor plans, and you will see that what's always the same is that the core is in the center of the apartment, and the apartment somehow rotates around the core. Just to give you an idea how we argued our approach to a little bit different way of living, which is an argument you really have to discuss with a housing association that is meant to deliver housing. And but they became interested in this approach, and you can also see that there's sometimes one balcony, sometimes two. They are individual balconies. And on the ground floor, this is the floor plan to the right, we have provided cluster apartments with individual entrances to each rooms. This is to give you an idea of the rotation within the apartments. And this is one of the rooms with the individual entrance. And these are photographs which have been taken, I think, 1 or 2 months ago, in May or June maybe. And finally the open space is finished. It has taken 1 more year to finish. We had many problems to finish the open space, which is such an important part of our work, not only here, but especially with this project, because we were commissioned with the open space as well. And you can see it's about 2 tower-like houses, and they are connected via a kind of passage that connects the 2 entrances. And I will guide you a little bit. We have used full concrete bricks. This is why the corner is so sharp. So we didn't use additional insulation, but we have used a certain concrete brick that allows for insulation as well. And there's a quite robust approach to the ground floor. And the space you can see at the end of the courtyard is this space. It's a bicycle storage space that also has water, so you can use it for collective uses as well if you take out the bicycles. Because the community space was not part of the program, we had to be a little bit tricky about it. This is the ground floor plan with the cluster apartments and the entrances and foyers and so on. There's a kindergarten behind the passage. This gives you an idea of the foyer. And the regular floor plans, I'm showing two, and you can see how the balconies rotate around the building. And here are finally some glimpses of life. The balconies are used now. And yeah, that's it. Okay, I come to present to you the last project. This will be quite short. It's a co-housing project again, but not in Berlin, but in Bavaria, in a smaller city called Fürth. It's next to Nuremberg. And here the idea is to develop an approach to a gallery space, kind of street in the sky that allows for circulation on one hand and access to the apartments, but on the other hand allows for some privacy within the same space. And I'm showing you here a gallery space from a building, from a high-rise building in Berlin, social housing from the 1960s. And this is what people usually imagine when they think about galleries. They don't have a very good reputation, and that's because in most cases the galleries are positioned in the north of the buildings and the nice living rooms are positioned to the south, so the gallery space is not at all meant to communicate and to chat, but only to reach your individual apartment and then leave the communal spaces. And that's something we want to consider and also to change and discuss with this building. So you can see that the gallery is larger and wider, and it is also divided into two sides somehow. The construction of this building is done, it's a kind of mix between a skeleton and a building that is made from walls. We have developed a frame system, and then you have a kind of T-like column that serves for the gallery space. This is how the building looks like at the moment. It doesn't look like a housing project. That's really interesting because there are no divisions at the moment, and all divisions are made from light constructions, or will be made from light constructions. This is the regular floor plan. You can see how the gallery moves from the east to the west. So this is not, it's not positioned with north on top. It really moves from, during the length and the course of the building, it moves from one side to the other. And on the opposite side, every apartment has either another small individual balcony or a large flower window. So there's also some individual open space. This is the construction site. In the middle of the site is an old building. It's a former workshop building, and the community will use it for workshop and community space and so on. And this is the other side. And what you can see here is that the plot is very interesting. It's between two streets, but one of the streets, Dr. Machstraße, is lowered by 4 meters or so, 4 meters for 50. And so the challenge was how to include this step, or which is one level, how to include it into the whole approach to the design of the building. And the community or the group, the Baugruppe, it's also a cooperative, and other parts are in ownership. So the background is a little bit similar to the IBEP. The group was interested, together with us, to have a public alley through the building, because they feel that they would like to contribute to the urban context and to be very inclusive to include all kinds of families and people from different backgrounds, but also to allow the public to to somehow participate in the life of the building and the activities within and outside of the building. And that's why the alley has steps. It's a little theater that you can see here. And these are the two ground floor plans. Another detail of the construction site. This is my last image. It's the promise of the whole project, this theater-like staircase, public staircase, that is part of this co-housing project. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for your talk. We've really enjoyed it. Excellent timekeeping, like spot on.
Thank you. I was afraid.
I'd like to have a drink of water, and
yeah, I have some water.
27 questions at the moment. I assume we'll have a few more. I tried, they were arriving while you were talking, and I tried to structure them according to certain topics, but I'm not 100% sure I'll manage to keep them that way, especially that they're coming now. There's a lot of interest in the relationship between communal and private spaces in your projects. There is some skepticism whether or not that will work in Australia or in any other different country or different context. And so let's go one by one. And could you compare them, let's say R50 to EBEB? In R50, there is this big balcony that wraps around the building. And Don Bates would like to know, is that a communal balcony seen as circulation, as connection and or associated space for each residence? Can you install objects, tables, chairs, barbecues, grills that make it difficult for others to pass by? So the question is, how do you use them actually? It's not really a private space, but it's neither purely a circulation space.
No, it's not a circulation space. That's the good idea about it, because you can put everything. It's a balcony to each apartment, but the balconies are connected because the circulation is organized in the core of the building. And then from the circulation in the core of the building, on each level, you have on one side, left or right, a connection to the all around balconies. So I think it's something new in a way that it's not a circulation space, other than with the last project, the Spiegelfabrik, where the whole discussion is about how to organize a circulation space in a way that it can serve for private individual needs and also for collective interaction and also for circulation. Yeah.
And how is that working in practice? Are people okay with it? In a sense that their privacy is not compromised by somebody being able to access their apartment from that balcony?
You mean R50, with R50?
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing about R50 is that many interesting things, but one thing is the people were there from the beginning. They actively took part in the design process. They are responsible for every decision that has been made. And when they voted for this, I would say, unusual approach to a private balcony, They knew what it would mean. But then there's also and they voted for it because they wanted to see this as a shared space. The interesting thing is it's not very wide. It's only 1 meter. So it's not a balcony where you would put a table and 6 chairs and a barbecue. It's rather a space that widens your apartment to the open space. It gives the apartment a certain, maybe you could compare it a little bit. I didn't think about it until now, but maybe you could compare it a little bit to the approach of Lacaton Vassal when they, wrapped Tour Bois-le-Prêtre, for example, or the new buildings in the new project in Bordeaux, when they wrapped it with a new layer of winter garden. Here it's a balcony, but it's more or less meant to enlarge the apartment to the open space. And at the same time, it allows for communication between the residents. And then, as I said, the apartments are made in a way that there's a certain length of balcony. It's not a balcony that is like 5 meters and then there's the next balcony. If you have 20 or 23 meters of, length, it's not so difficult to allow for privacy, intimacy, and so on. Yeah, but it's more like you could put a chair and then when you have read your book, you take the chair back to the apartment. You can leave it there, but it's not meant to have, it's a different approach to the idea of a balcony, I think. Okay. But we have a climate in Berlin that is not that you would spend 3 months of the year outside during the day and night. It's more that you are happy if there are a couple of days, or maybe this summer it seems to be weeks, but it's also a little bit terrifying that the climate changes so obviously. But usually I would say it's not that you would spend day after day outside. It's more that you are connected to something else, to something larger, and that you have, And I presented the image by Heinrich Tessenau, the beautiful image where inside and outside were connected in a certain subtle way. It's more about the detailing of a certain space between, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I can see the pattern there. And in IBE project, the circulation space is a little bit more than just the circulation space. So do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I tried to. I tried to, for example, when I presented the image at the IBEP on the rooftop with the studio to the right and the staircase to the left and the 3 Japanese students looking at Berlin, and where there was this concrete bench that was a flower box at the same time. I think we are very much interested in this kind, because it's also kind of, if we look at modernist buildings from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there are a lot of approaches to, with large housing projects especially, a lot of approaches to the inclusion of public space or community space, but in so many cases it was not the time for it. It was not realized that this was strengthen the community, because people were not moving there because they wanted to live in a community. They were moving there because they needed a space to live. And I still think that we can learn a lot from these projects. Look at Robin Hood Gardens by Allison and Peter Smithsons, which has been demolished. I mean, many elements of this project have been kind of reenacted within the IBEP, for example. We are very much aware of, and also in Berlin, we have so many large housing projects that another one is the so-called Palaceum, which had a nickname, Sozialpalast. It's a huge building by Jürgen Savade, which was innovative when it was planned. And then in the 1990s, it was almost demolished. And now there's a kind of certain management that encourages the community and helps when help is needed. And certainly now there's a long waiting list. So this is how it can change. And I think it's, yeah, it has a lot to do with our ideas and ideas how we can share spaces and how we want to see and how we want to live in communities while having our individual spaces at the same time. We need, of course.
I'll try to combine several questions into one. So if we look at the photos of shared spaces, they seem to be immaculate. So the straightforward question is, are they staged? Did Andrew prepare every little detail when taking photos?
No, nothing is
staged. There is a code behind it, like people behave in a certain way and they organize themselves to keep them in order. So these are the questions made by Dawn, Alice, and Andrew to a certain extent.
Okay, hello to Dawn. We met so many years ago in Helsinki. I don't know if you remember, in the context of a workshop Jan Verwenen organized. But okay, I tried to talk about it when I talked about the detail of the south facade of IBEB, where it looks as if it was one, you know? It looked so similar. It didn't look like individual expressions of lifestyles. And the same was at R50 when there was this opening day and every door was open. It was like being in one apartment. They were furnished in a similar way. They were individual, but it was not like, you know, you move from one to the other, but more like the floor is the same, the ceiling is the same, there's some artworks, some chairs, there's a bedroom, there's a table to work, another one to eat. But it's not as if these people think that they have to represent something that goes beyond what it is. And this, I think, this is also true for Andrew's photographs and also for the photographs by Jonas Holthaus and Stefan Jagenburg, which I added to give you a different perspective. And they are more informal. They look a little bit more at the informal gestures and details. So Andrew he's an architect, so his photographs are very straight. But I think, no, nothing is staged. I mean, that's what it is like. Yeah.
Okay. I've asked about floor plans. You've revealed that in your talk. But here is a good question about floor plans from Nancy. Is the floor plan the main design tool in your design process, and the exterior form emerges from these plans?
I think the floor plans are very important. I decided not to show the sections because for this lecture, I was also focusing on the floor plans because I wanted to follow your ideas, Djordje. But I could also give a lecture about the sections, and it could also be interesting because the sections are quite complex, of course. I showed the sections of the IBEB because otherwise you would be able to understand how it is made. No, but I think the floor plans are really important. And during the last 10 years, when we worked with these groups, and in order to give them some freedom to decide about their individual needs, I think our work shifted a little bit to the overall layout of the floor plan. So we are very much interested in the structure of the buildings, but not only how it is made, from which material, but also the a kind of structural approach and an approach to infrastructure that would allow for, an organization that can be built and can be built in an affordable way, because this is very, very important, but also allow for some flexibility in, choices of individual residents, but not only now, also over a kind of lifespan, like a generation, or to allow for different generations to live together. Take a family with 2 little children and they have certain needs. They are looking for a bedroom, they need a room for the children and some space. But these children will grow old. What about when they are 16 or 18? They might need, a separate entrance where they can invite friends without disturbing their parents and so on. So life changes, and this is something we are extremely interested in. For example, at the EBEP, the larger apartments have 2 doors, and this is exactly because we think that if you have a need for a large apartment because you are many, this might change. Children might move out. You might need to have an elder relative like father or mother to take into your apartment. Work can change, so you can move your work from what we are all doing at the moment, from a kind of office or studio space to home. So I think now at this moment we are extremely sensitive for these changes, and we know that we can manage, but sometimes we think, is this space really the right space? Has it been designed for this need for flexibility? And this is something we are interested in. It's also, I think that, do you remember the second image that I showed you, the drawing of, this cutout, the drawing of this idea of the so-called Wunschhaus? What kind of life we might imagine in these spaces, even if it is a single family house. Yeah.
We have to start closing the event. We're almost running out of time. Maybe just one very last question. And I've noticed you used the term rotation, and I couldn't find the literal translation for the term. Did you mean spatial flexibility or adaptability by that word, or you had something else in mind? You were talking about R50.
Okay. The balcony structure is rotating around the building, right? But then if you look at the apartments, you can see that there's not only an entrance, a circulation space, and then rooms, but that the rooms are connected. And with many floor plans at R50, the idea was to connect the rooms on the inner side of the facade, just like how the balcony works. That's why I showed this image where there is a kind of second connection. Rotation might not be the right expression, but for example, with the floor plans at Paul-Zobel-Straße, you saw that the spaces are rotating around the core. At R50, it's a little bit more subtle to use but I think it's the same. Yeah.
Understood. Thanks very much. There is a lot more questions here, but I think we really have to close. And again, we would like to thank you for your participation and your talk. It was wonderful, a great inspiration for a lot of us here. And we hope to see you live in sometime soon. There will be a lot of events coming up on MSD at Home series. It's getting really intense. The next one is Thomas Daniel. That is already tomorrow. And then there is a few more things. Next week is Winka Dubbelden. As I said, many interesting things also available as recorded. And we warmly recommend all of them. I'd also like to thank Philippa and Basil, whom you haven't seen, but they've made this happen. They made it possible, and I'd like to thank them for their support. Thanks everyone for seeing this. Thank you.
Thank you.